Welcome to Resilient Earth Radio, where we host speakers from the United States and around the world to talk about critical issues facing our planet and the positive actions people are taking. We also let our listeners learn how they can get involved and make a difference.
Coming up on Resilient Earth Radio, Howie Garrett of the Orca Whale Sighting Network, which encourages observation to increase awareness and knowledge about the community of orcas and other marine mammals in the Puget Sound. They foster a stewardship ethic to motivate a diverse audience to take action to protect and restore their critical habitat. They believe it's time to reflect, reconnect, and respond as better caretakers of this planet. Subscribe below and find us on Facebook and Instagram. We are Resilient Earth Radio, a project of Planet-Centric Media.
Welcome again to Resilient Earth Radio, which showcases the positive actions being taken around the world to help regenerate our planet and rebalance our climate, how they are doing it, and how you can get involved. I'm Leanne Lindsay, host and GM of KGUA 88.3 FM, an independent public radio station, and a film and audio producer at Seastorm Studios. Joining me are my co-producers and co-hosts, Scott and Tree Mercer of Mindanao Whale and Seal Study. Good morning.
Good morning, Leanne.
Our guest is Howie Garrett, who is president of the board of directors for Orca Network, and their goal is to connect the people with whales of the Pacific Northwest. Orca Network's whale sighting and education project encourages observation to increase awareness and knowledge about the southern resident community of orcas, that's J, K, and L pods, bigs, transient orcas, and other cetaceans, and to foster a stewardship ethic to motivate a diverse audience to take action, protect, and restore their critical habitat. Good morning, Howie, and thanks for joining us on Resilient Earth Radio.
Good morning, Leanne, and good morning, Tree and Scott. Thank you for having me this morning. Look forward to a great little conversation.
I want to also mention that you began as a field researcher with the Center for Whale Research on San Juan Island in 1981, and you are also the board chair for the Center for Whale Research, which was an organization that was founded and led by your late brother, Ken Balcom. And now you have the Orca Network, which you founded with your wife, Susan. We wanted to get your background on how the two of you did that.
I got involved in 1981 when I first came out to Friday Harbor on the invitation of my brothers, Ken Balcom. He asked me to contribute just by volunteering to what was then Orca Survey, which meant going out on a boat and taking photos of the right and left side of each whale each time we found them out there, which compiled the whole demographic picture of the population of southern residents. We almost never saw the transient orcas, the other type of orcas at that time. It was completely focused on the resident orcas, and it still is, really. But that gave me a sort of an intimate look into their lives, and that was in the early 80s, which was only about a half a dozen years after the very first studies began, first in Canada and then in the US with Ken. The reports were coming in, the papers were being published, and we were beginning to see already that we had a very unusual animal out there that had characteristics that had not been seen in any other wildlife. For one thing, it was realized by then that the offspring, male and female, stay with their mothers their entire lives. That was unheard of. And it was beginning to dawn on the scientific community that there were two completely different types of orcas in the same waters, crossing paths on a daily basis. they maintained complete in what I would call social integrity. They maintained their membership in their communities, in their families, so, big extended families. And now the genetics have come in and shown that they are indeed completely distinct communities. And I had just completed my college education in Colorado with a degree in sociology. And so I'm looking at these communities of highly developed cultures of orcas. And I'm realizing, wow, they they are not only sentient beings, of course, but they are persons for all intents and purposes. They have identities, they have membership in their families and in their extended families, in their communities, and they adhere to their cultural traditions. Also, John Ford's work on acoustics was coming out at the same time in the early 1980s. And that was showing that each community had a completely different vocabulary, that they communicated using sounds that are repeated, they're replicated all the time. They use these vocabularies of sounds, and that is how they are able to bond and bind their communities, to identify each other, to communicate over great distances. And all of that just added up to a fascination for me that, oh my God, what are we looking at here? This is above and beyond, anything in established science that I could find. That certainly piqued my interest for life. That was what, 50, almost 45 years ago. And there's no let up. It never gets old. In 1993, Ken was asked to help Keiko, Free Willy whale, by the producers of the movie Free Willy. Everybody, including the owners of the park in Mexico, realized that he had outgrown that pool and that he was sick and dying in that pool, and he really needed to go somewhere else. Or SeaWorld said he should go to another park, but not their park. They didn't want him. So there was a great controversy over, well, will somebody build a $15 million park for this whale? And that wasn't going to happen. But Ken did the research, and he interviewed everybody having to do with anything to do with captivity and the capture of whales and how they managed captivity. And the impression that he got, and of course, he had already been studying intimately the southern resident orcas since 1976. And so he was almost 20 years into this study. He had this intuitive understanding of the orcas' strength and robustness and just their power. And so he had a lot of faith in them. And by all the research, and he did a complete, of course, literature research and at every nook and cranny of how to understand orcas better. And he formulated this plan of Keiko going back to the ocean. That plan met with stiff resistance, you could say. So he was more or less, removed as project manager for this plan. But he also knew right off that, hey, we have a far better candidate in Miami, and that was Kokitai, Olita. So he started a campaign for her. When he did that, along with the governor and the Secretary of State of Washington, side by side, they announced the campaign, but they didn't actually have a campaign. They didn't even have a phone number to call, and they all had day jobs. And so they were very busy people. So I raised my hand and said, well, I'll start a nonprofit then and get this ball rolling and really try to generate some publicity and raise awareness on her capability to return. That was what, the industry with their massive megaphones, with their ability to saturate the public with their messaging, SeaWorld and every other marine park, and all of the public and even a lot of the scientific community that they had been able to reach had the notion that no, it's too late for her. She's been habituated by captivity and she can never return. So we had to try to argue against that. That was sort of my mission. And what happened with Susan was that she was the director of a volunteer environmental program on Whidbey Island. And so she had monthly meetings with people just to sort of inform and educate her volunteers, dozens and dozens of people who just volunteered to clean up beaches and learn about the environment. It was a very thriving program. So she had a meeting that featured the photographer of the captures in 1970. He was a publisher of the local newspaper. So he got out there and took the photos that are still the photos in circulation from that capture that show up in media all the time because he gave us the rights to use his black and white photos. So he was giving a talk just describing from his point of view how the captures went. And at the end of his talk, I raised my hand and said, and now for the rest of the story, there is one survivor. That was in 1995. There was one survivor of those captures. 38 or 9, the records are not very good, but were delivered, and another 12 or 13 were killed during the capture. And they had all died, all of the ones delivered to SeaWorld and all the roadside attractions in Europe and South America, they had all died. I told her story and that we had a campaign going to bring her home.
Howie, that was Susan Berta, your wife, that you were talking about there.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. That's how we met. Who was at her meeting. I crashed her meeting. And she immediately signed on. I saw that she was very dedicated and she was an organizer. She was an organizer of this big environmental group, which became the model for beach watchers, that's as it's called, in 8 other counties, based on her foundational work to set up this program. And she wanted to join the board of our nonprofit. And so, yes, indeed.
And we're talking about the Orca Network. Just to remind our audience what we're talking about here is Orca Network.
Yes, and that became Orca Network.
We'll be right back, right after this special message.
Need a plumber or a seamstress? Or maybe you want to see what's going on Friday night. Go to the northcoastlink.com, your online business directory and concierge for the Mendonoma Coast. Find out who to know, where to go, and what to do, all on one website. Local event calendars, support groups, community organizations, shopping, dining, lodging, churches, classes, local books, podcasts, radio stations, newspapers, outdoor adventures, and so much more. The northcoastlink.com, connecting communities that stretch across the northern Sonoma, southern Mendocino coast. The northcoastlink.com, online business directory and concierge.
Welcome back to Resilient Earth Radio. And what are some of the scope and range of the types of things that Orca Network does? First of all, you can already see a few of the reasons why this is important, raising awareness and helping to spur action. Give us a broad overview of what Orca Network does and how you do it.
Yes, well, Susan, applied her skills, and one of her interests, really, was that her office was in a lighthouse,
Mm.
and so she had a view
Wow.
of the north end, the opening end of Admiralty Inlet. And Admiralty Inlet is the main route, the
Seen
big
it.
thoroughfare down into Puget Sound, all of Seattle and Tacoma and
Wow.
Olympia and all of these urban areas down there. And so the whales went up and down Admiralty Inlet, and she had a perfect lighthouse view. So she called her friends and said, "Hey, there's whales going by. Come on out and take a look." And so that started the list. First, it was telephone, and then email came into our lives. And so she compiled an email list. And of course, a lot of other people signed on, and it grew and grew. So she made that a part of Orca Network. So that is sort of the basic constant daily refresher course in, hey, people, we have whales living around us. They're in the neighborhood, they're everywhere all the time. Sure enough, virtually every day there are whales. Right now we have, a humpback about 5 miles south of us, and every day now it's more the transient or big orcas that are around all the time, but also southern residents. In fact, J-Pod was yesterday right off San Juan Island. The whales just never cease to surprise and amaze and fascinate everyone.
Scott and Tree could certainly agree with that, as that's what they do all the time here on our coast, too. Just south of
Exactly.
you, they're watching the whales and the sea life every day
From a lighthouse, too.
from a lighthouse. Now, you've got
Oh,
to talk
good.
to Mark about getting an office up
An
there.
office in there. Yeah, we're on the
Well, yeah,
bluffs.
it's a proven formula.
Yeah.
Do it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Again, describe some of the educational programs, some of the other outreach that you do, and the network, how it works.
Yes. Well, she also started a stranding network. She had already had one with beach watchers, so it is now the official NOAA approved stranding network for any seals or porpoise or certainly whales that might wash up on a beach. And we have a veterinarian who does the necropsies, and so we keep those records. And also educational programs. We have our annual Ways of Wales event in January every year here on Whidbey Island.
I want to
And
go.
oh yes, well yeah, we have a half a dozen speakers, and we've gone virtual now, so it's broadcast far and wide, and it's really fascinating. It's a gathering of people who care about whales and have expertise in certain areas. And so that's always great. And then in April, we have our Welcome the Whales, which is to celebrate the gray whales. Because there's also this amazing phenomenon of gray whales, a very micro population, was about a dozen. They've grown now to maybe 18 or 19 because they come and go a lot. It's hard to count exactly, but these are gray whales who have discovered a cornucopia, a feast of shrimp that are able to thrive in the mud flats on the east side of Whidbey Island, on Whidbey and Camino and surrounding mud flats. There are three big rivers that pour in all kinds of sediment, and the sediment forms into mud flats. And so they've discovered that this is how you survive. The gray whales have gone through several what they call unusual mortality events. These gray whales that discover these mud flats with all this shrimp have survived those UMEs. So it's been very helpful to them. So anyway, it's the same ones, the same identifiable photo identified gray whales that come in every year. So they now have names and personalities, and people go out and they see the patch and little patch and Dubnook, and all these names that people make up for them. So we celebrate that in April, and have a parade and a speaker, and it's a great.
Wow, that's a big ordeal.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Actually, I am going to announce what I think will be a new tradition that will be on August 18, which is the memorial. It'll be the first year since Toki died in Miami. And we're going to have like a ceremony. I mean, it'll be a gathering. It'll be drumming, singing, food, and that'll be at Limekiln Lighthouse on San Juan Island, which I well, actually, it was very obvious way back in the 80s, but now I really see how that side, the west side of San Juan Island, is a very special place to the whales. They're foraging breadbasket, and but not so much in the last couple of years because the salmon have been decimated that go, they're headed from the ocean up to the rivers. And when they do come in, some still do. And so actually the whales have been coming back a little more in the last couple of years. Maybe that's a good sign that they're actually coming back. But historically, if you go back thousands of years, every year, all these salmon would come in and they would hit this 20-mile wall and would tumble and turn in the tides, and then they gradually reorient and find their rivers. But in the meantime, they're easy pickings. And so it was like the best place to come and get your Chinook salmon, And so all the southern residents would come into the side of San Juan. And so it was a very special place for them. That is where we are going to hold this event on August 18, and we're already talking about it becoming an annual event. So I think we'll be doing more of those. And, it's to raise awareness of the whales, of course. It's all just to educate and bring out their special qualities and sort of who they are.
You're listening to the voice of Howie Garrett, and he and his wife, Susan Berta, founded Orca Network all those years ago. Look at all the things they've been accomplishing since. I'm Leanne Lindsay. This is Resilient Earth Radio. And also with me are from Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study, my co-producers and co-hosts, Scott and Tree Mercer. And Scott was just telling me, too, about the orca sighting that was up here in Fort Bragg.
Yeah, that's that Tim Bray. Send me the photo, then on to you and back. We hadn't heard if any matches were made on that.
Yes. Oh, I am sorry. I didn't get that back to you, and now I'm going to have to go back and look. I will. Yes. Dave Ellifrit was able to ID some of those. They were transients. I will. Those were extremely valuable.
And you were talking about that whole network, Scott, too.
Yeah, I was trying to explain very quickly before we got on with you what Orca Network is and how it grew. This is the first time I've heard step by step from how it started and what you and Susan did and how much Susan was involved in this from the beginning. And I just never heard the whole story. And I do remember how you brought this awareness. You were whale watching in the Gulf of Maine at the same time I was in the early days. You were out of the Gloucester House.
What does that mean, Gloucester House?
That's a big restaurant in Gloucester Harbor, Gloucester, Massachusetts. I used to just say Gloucester and people would perk up because of the movie, The Perfect Storm, but sadly people don't even read that book anymore. That was a huge book and very educational.
It was a great show.
Yeah.
In fact, Tree and I are going to be in Gloucester in a week for a family wedding, and we'll probably toss a wave to the lighthouse's kid. It's a line from the movie. Well, I was out in the late 70s. I always get confused when I first ran into you. I guess it was in the 80s, early 80s.
Right. And I went out with you from Newburyport a couple times, and that was great fun.
Yeah, I told that story a couple times, several times, of you and I on the roof of the first Captain Red, the one we used there, and watching that tug and barge coming right at a mother and calf humpback. And right before the tugboat got to the mother and calf, she and the calf took a dive, and after the the tug went over with all the racket they make and that long cable, and then the barge went over them. The mother popped up right behind us. She knew exactly when the end of that barge went over the two of them. You and I were up there having a litter of kittens on top of the
Yeah.
boat, waiting to see what was going to happen. But they did like to feed on sand eels right in the shipping lanes. They were there first, and they weren't going to move. That's still going on there. But what I was getting at was, during that time, I was teaching my class at the University of New Hampshire, continuing studies, and I hadn't really thought about the animals that are in captivity. Occasionally people would ask me what I thought, and I gave the stock answer at that time. Well, it raises awareness of people who can't get out whale watching, and they at least see the animals and how big they are, which was a really pretty dumb answer, but that was kind of the stock one we gave. And then you were the one who raised the awareness. I think it may have been in newspapers and so forth, but then I started getting a barrage of questions from students each week. No, what do you really think? When I give that stupid answer, they'd say, yes, but what do you really think? And you really got me thinking about it and how cruel it was, because we were always seeing the live animals out there in the water. I got thinking about these concrete walls and the calling they were doing, and then the way that you have, well, since with Toki, I guess it was, kept on calling all those decades to her family.
Right, little known. That was a completely suppressed information. They were not allowed to tell anyone that she was making those calls. So we have almost no recordings. We have enough to identify that she was making southern resident calls, but they were kind of, incidental and smuggled out and everything. That was like forbidden information, to know that she was calling out in those same calls that she learned from her family before capture, constantly, right up until her last days. So I just think that is a crucial fact, people to understand. I mean, she was a southern resident orca in her mind, her memories, her identity completely her southern resident orca. She could have come back and reintegrated. I'm confident of that.
I mean, that is profound.
Just how connected those whales are to their family members. It's so fascinating to me, Howie. Wow, that's something. And you did such a beautiful presentation for our Ocean Life Symposium. I see you wearing the shirt.
Yes.
And also, Howard, you were very active in getting dams taken down to help return the salmon. Yeah, tell us about that, Howard.
Yes, and that is just about to heat up once again, because there's a new film, a documentary film that has just been produced. I haven't even seen it yet, and I'm in it.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
but it'll be called The Snake and the Whales.
Okay.
Which is kind of an intriguing title because it's about the Snake River dams. There are 4 dams on the Snake River, and the Snake River is actually equal to the Columbia in its size and drainage, all the way into Montana. There are 5,500 square miles of pristine wilderness in Idaho that are upstream of these 4 dams on the Snake River. It's perfect spawning habitat. Some of the, most populous and biggest Chinook salmon spawned up there for thousands of years. And then in the 1960s and 70s, the Army Corps of Engineers, they were just, in this heyday of building dams, taming nature, providing power and all that. So they built 4 dams on the Snake River. And even before they built them, the fish biologists from 4 different states said, if you do that, you will kill those salmon, because it's not just that the spawners headed upstream have difficulty going up the ladders and maneuvering. It's the smolts, little ones, after they have nurtured in that wilderness, after being spawned, way up in the riverbeds, in the high mountains. I mean, it's like they climb a couple of thousand feet and 400 miles from the ocean.
Wow, 400 miles.
And when they come downstream, they don't actually swim to the ocean. They flow to the ocean. In fact, they flow backwards for the most part. They're actually oriented back up. somehow they have a premonition that in a couple of years after growing up in the ocean, I'm going to want to come back up this stream. So they're kind of oriented that way. But there's 140 miles of reservoirs of just slack water caused by those four dams. And so when they hit that slack water, they don't flow anymore. They're just kind of stuck in a stagnant pool. And that makes them subject to predation and disease, and they lose their metabolic timing because they're going from fresh water to salt water, and they have to adjust their whole metabolism for the ocean. It's all genetically programmed and timed, and for a certain time of going downstream and hitting the salt water. And so they're stalled out up there. It weakens them tremendously. And the ones that do go over the dams, they suffer from nitrogen overload that weakens them. There's just tremendous mortality. So it's really the smolts can't make it to the ocean. And if they do make it, they're in such weak shape that, they're easy prey for all sorts of birds and seals and predators and everything. So the dams are decimating the best populations of Chinook salmon, and the southern resident orcas specialize. 80% of their diet is Chinook salmon. And so those salmon are, not available to them. They don't make it to the ocean. They can't grow up in the Pacific. There's a huge campaign to bring down those dams. So
that was my next question. What is being done about this?
Yeah, well, we have been campaigning, trying to tell that story. And there are, salmon biologists sign on letters with dozens of the top of the line salmon biologists who understand this. And of course, Ken, my brother, was a fierce campaigner to bring down the dams. But now here comes, and it'll be out when a major streaming service, probably Netflix, will pick it up.
Great.
Excellent.
It'll be out there, and of course we'll amplify it in every way possible.
We will too.
Absolutely, we will too. Definitely.
And it'll tell the story, and it's about the whales and the dams. I mean, it'll connect the dams, the salmon, and the orcas, southern resident orcas, and how much they need those salmon. So that's coming out soon.
And I think this is a great time for me to read this quote that Scott brought to my attention that your wife said, Susan Berta. She said, "We are all intricately connected, from tiny plankton to forage fish, salmon, orcas, tall firs and cedars, mountains, rivers, and the ocean. It is time to reflect, to reconnect, and to respond as better caretakers of the planet." That sums it up right there.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
It really is. I feel emotional just thinking about it because it's all tied together, and this is how our planet works in these ways, and we have been disrupting that ability to function properly. We're all connected.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it was in that spirit that Ken purchased a 45-acre former horse ranch on the bank of the Elwha River, because just 10 years ago, two dams that completely blocked all salmon headed up into the Olympic wilderness area. It blocked them for 100 years. And those 10 years ago were finally brought down so that river is now free, and the salmon are repopulating and regrowing their numbers. It's a very, small habitat compared to the Snake River habitat, but he bought that ranch to sort of celebrate and be part of the preservation and awareness of all that interconnected nature. The ranch actually spans the river. It's both sides, there's a part of it. That is the awareness that we're trying to carry out, to open up to people. And I will say, in that regard, we have had very close relationships with tribes with native tribes, the Lummi tribe, the Samish, the Suquamish, Puyallup, Tulalip, Swinomish. I mean, I could go on. There are, many, many people that are speaking out with that tribal awareness that is just that, the living integrity and the vital life force that is within every living thing. Everything is connected from the plankton to the whales. That's sort of a part of our education now. We're learning from these tribal traditions.
This station here was founded by Native American Peggy Berryhull and her partner Susan Rushmeyer. That they are with the nonprofit Native Media Resource Center, and KGUA is a project of that. And it's to reach out to all populations within our community. But the attention now that I believe that I've seen in film festivals, at the Mendocino Film Festival, there was a whole indigenous film section where they talked about reintroducing fire to our forests, or they talked about foods and, native foods and how we regenerate our earth through better farming practices based on some things that have been done for thousands of years until we came along or other people came along and disrupted that practice. And I think this re-education through different media outlets is a good thing, through films. And I'm really looking forward to this film, Snake and the Whale, coming out on Netflix.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We're hoping.
That's a lot of work to put in time and effort and energy on that. And Scott, you had mentioned something about they do educational programs and a symposium every year for...
Yeah, that's the January program.
Oh, that is the January one.
Yeah, I also want to remind people that Howard was also in that film that I'm sure you've seen, Blackfish. I'm sure that he was a big part of the production of it, but he was in the film as well. And I believe Ken was too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can still find that online, I would imagine. Can you?
Yes.
I think so. I'm hearing from people who are just seeing it now,
really?
more than 10 years after it came out, and people are still seeing it.
The film that Howard put together that we tried to use one morning here in an emergency situation during Symposium 5, I think it was. There was a cyclonic bomb on the East Coast, and Cindy Wygren, who runs the White Shark, she couldn't get on because a tree had gone down across her telephone wires and all that. And it's damned to extinction. And we were all a little bit worried. Calmer heads were a little about the copyright thing. And we got you on the phone even, and you wanted to have us show it. And you were conferring with somebody else who was a little more cautious than you and I were at the time, because we really wanted to show it as part of the Symposium 5 because we couldn't get Cindy on from Cape Cod.
Right.
We have that film at home.
We are going to have another Ocean Life Symposium coming up
And we can get
fall.
Howard and Susan on together,
That would be great.
which we're embarrassed that we didn't do today. Tree and I were talking about it on the way here to the station.
We'll get her on, though, right?
Yeah.
Possibly
Yeah.
on the Ocean Life Symposium.
Yeah, because we hope to have you for number 7, which will make a clean streak for you. And we need to get Susan on with you.
You'll be happy to hear that we're talking about her.
Excellent.
We'll be right back, right after this special message. Composer and writer Eric Ulliman and writer lyricist Bob Garrett have written and recorded an animated musical called Wake Up, a humorous, endearing, and inspiring story about environmental awareness that appeals to all ages, with the main audience being children.
You couldn't hear the breeze if it weren't for our leaves, and the birds won't have no place to build a nest. Little kids won't learn to climb, your rum and coke won't have no lime. What are you gonna lean on when you rest? There ain't nothing more good-natured than a tree. There's They're dependable and loyal as can be.
Eric and Bob are seeking like-minded people to help them get this animated musical comedy finished and out in the world as a role model to inspire and empower young people to pursue a meaningful role in rescuing Mother Earth.
Cut a tree down, build a cabin. Cut a tree down, plant more corn. Cut a tree down for a highway. Cut a tree down to keep you warm. Cut a tree down cause it blocks your view or drops too many leaves. Every time you cut a tree down, Mother Nature grieves. It's hard for me to justify why you cut us down for double ply and flush us down the toilet to the sea. A tree will go out on a limb for you. It'll stop the rain and shade you too.
If you'd like to know more about this production, go to wakeupthemusical.com. There you will find information about the concept, the story, the production, and how you can get involved.
There ain't nothing more good-natured than a tree. They're dependable and loyal as can be. While money, wives, and children often leave, you'll always know where you can find your tree. Yes, sirree, there. Oh, you'll always know where you can find your tree.
Welcome back to Resilient Earth Radio. And this is Howie Garrett of the Orca Network, along with his wife, who's not here today, but will be joining us, Susan Berta, who helped him found the Orca Network many, many years ago. And we also have other whale experts here with us from the Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study, Scott and Trey Mercer. They've studied both coasts. They have a long history of whale watching and teaching. They have such knowledge and expertise that they share too throughout many networks. There are so many that are here along our coast. They too were in a documentary called Washed Ashore. We've heard many times when they come on the show once a month with Peggy. Once it was about the UME, the unusual mortality event. But we get updates on the numbers of the traffic of whales coming along here. And then you guys share that with a wide, diverse network too. And why, Tree, is this so important? Sharing this information.
We need to have eyes on the ocean to see how well or how not well these different species of cetaceans are doing. We just like to contribute to that knowledge in any way we can. And so we think by watching every day and recording their behaviors, their numbers when we can, seeing them on a daily basis, knowing that we may not see them every day. Today is quite foggy. I'm not sure we'll be able to see whales today. But now that we've been doing this 11 years, we are establishing a good amount of data that might be able to show trends and are things changing, and they are. I love what Howard said about the gray whales eating the shrimp, the ghost shrimp that's available to them. And they're doing everything they can to survive. It's fascinating to be a part of that.
All of you, why is it so important that we protect the whales? Why is that slogan from decades ago, save the whale? Why is that so important for us to understand?
Let's hear.
Howie?
Well, I think we can start with they have an inalienable right to live, right to the pursuit of happiness. I mean, they have a right to be there. From an ecological point of view, they are contributors to the productivity of life in the oceans. They actually nurture their own food source by their revitalization of the ocean that helps to promote the plankton growth and the bait fish, the small fish that some of that humpbacks eat, for instance, but also the deadfalls. When they fall to the bottom, they create huge life. I don't know what you could call it, centers of life that feeds on their enormous bodies, for years to come.
And a
They're
great
huge.
carbon sink, too.
Yes, they are. They hold carbon and they clean up, they sustain the chemical balance of the ocean in a way that keeps it productive for all other species. They're just essential to the life of the ocean.
And the life on this planet, because it's every second breath that we get from oxygen that comes from the phytoplankton, which they feed with their excrement, and it's a cycle, this cycle of life and how it functions here on this planet.
Tree has a question.
About the whales in Portugal?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you
Oh,
yeah, the killer whales, the orcas that have been playing with the boats, and that's received a lot of publicity and a lot of, in my opinion, a lot of kind of crazy explanations as to why the whales are behaving that way. You did touch on this in the symposium, but if you could tell us what you think.
well, it's still mysterious. We really don't know what's going on in the minds of those whales, but it's very systematic and very calculated, and the same kind of behavior. It's been going on for 4 years now, and no let up. But it seems to be this one population of Gibraltar orchid that feed primarily, just as southern residents depend on Chinook salmon, they depend on the bluefin tuna that migrate from the Mediterranean up into the North Atlantic. So, yeah, it's very repetitive and very much not intended to harm anybody. It just disables the boats. They tend to go for the rudders. They're breaking the rudders or disabling the rudders. There have been about 4 vessels that, in the course of that, sprang leaks and began to sink and had to get towed in. But they really don't seem to want to harm the humans on board. So the prevailing theory behind that is that it's pure play, that it's just a fad that certain ones developed, and so they spread it. And I think that underestimates them. I think there's much more of a communication intended by this kind of behavior. I think it's messaging. And I think to understand that, you need to sort of look at that population. They're severely endangered. They're down to, the estimates are about 35 to 40 individuals.
Whoa, that's small.
And that's very small. If you look at orca populations around the world, they're usually on the range of 200 or 300, sometimes more or a few less. But that's a sort of a healthy community genetically, and this is sort of their optimum size. But so this is a severely decimated and endangered population. And that's because of the overfishing of their prey. I believe they're trying to tell the humans that they really need to pay attention to them, that
Wake up.
They're starving. They're not able to reproduce successfully because they can't have a continual supply of their diet of the bluefin tuna. They can't speak English. We can't speak whale. So they've got to communicate in symbols. And I think, their symbolic action is, come on, humans, what you're doing is causing us to die off. And they're surely aware of their population size and their historical population. I really think that they are trying to tell people, leave us some food, please. I just don't think there's enough for them up there.
We need to live so you can.
Yes.
In essence, Howie, Garrett, we really appreciate you joining us today. And I'm Leanne Lindsay. This is Tree Mercer, Scott Mercer, Mindanoma Whale and Seal Study, and Howie last few words about Orca Network and what your focus is right now.
Well, it's an ongoing focus of every day. We have a thriving sighting team, and this team scours the social media and gets calls and emails and our web form and everything else where people let them know when they see whales. And it is so exciting because most of them are first-time reporters.
So anybody can get involved.
Everybody and anybody. And of course, it's gotten a whole lot of publicity, so everybody is aware that if they see whales, let Orca Network know, and then we will let people know. And we also have a map of places where people can go to see from the shore. People are brought into awareness every day. Who knows what we'll be doing in the future? Like I was saying, we're having this event on San Juan Island at Lime Kiln on August 18 that will be very indigenous. Our Lummi and Samish elders or advisors are going to be helping us with that and setting the ceremonies and the singing and drumming, and it's all to honor Toki, Tokitai, or Skali Chaptanat in Lummi, who is a Quotolmachin, which is their word for orca, and that means the people who live under the waves. So that is the perspective, that these are people, equivalent to us. They have rights, they have membership, they have families, they are pursuing their happiness, and we need to work with them, for them, and honor them. And that's what we're doing.
Now, last year, he gave you a talk on Toki and that really strange, bizarre ceremony that you had filmed after Toki died and the orcas in that area. And anytime you want to revisit that, you and Susan, it's absolutely fascinating. And that's one of the most rewatched of talks of any of the symposiums.
My mind is still blown by that. So yes, I could talk about it anytime.
Mine as well, Howie.
Yeah.
Thank you for all this wonderful information and enlightening us all.
That's Howard Garrett of the Orca Network. And this is Tree Mercer and Scott Mercer from the Mendonoma Whale and Seal Study. You can find them out on the point by the Point Arena Lighthouse many times, watching the ocean and the whales, reporting that to us as well, contributing to that big network. This is Resilient Earth Radio. Thanks for listening to KGUA in Wallala, 88.3 FM. Thanks for listening to Resilient Earth Radio, where we talk about critical issues facing our planet and the positive actions people are taking. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram and wherever you get your podcasts. The music for the show is Castle by the Sea from international composer Eric Alleman of the Sea Ranch in Sonoma County, California.